Today, I want to show you how to build a complete login system that's going to work for your next project. Make sure to stick to the end of the video because by the end, I'm going to show you how to create a working login system that implements a database that stores information like username and password. All right, without wasting any more time, let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say from Flask, import Flask. And that's basically going to import the Flask library, which is basically something in Python that lets you create web apps from scratch. And it does this by handling routes, handling requests such as the post request and get requests. And I'm going to be talking about those later in the video, so make sure to stick around for that. But anyways, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to first initialize the Flask app instance. So to do that, I'm going to say app is equal to Flask, and inside I'm going to say __ name __ because I'm going to say if __ name __ is equal to __ main __ then I'm going to pass in, or I'm going to say app.run, which is basically going to run the Flask app. And so inside the parameters or the parentheses, I'm going to say debug is equal to true. And I'm saying this because if you're in the middle of creating a Flask app, then debug equals true is helpful because it gives you helpful messages if you make a mistake somewhere in your code, and it tells you where the error occurred. So that's going to be a really useful feature for me. And now I'm going to just run that just to see what happens. So I'm going to say run it, and then I'm going to use the Python debugger, and then it's going to take a while to load. And then after it works, it's going to say that's running on this local link. So I'm going to do control click on that link. If I take a look at that, it says that the local, or it says that the requested URL is not found on the server. And this is because I haven't handled any routes before. So I'm gonna show you how to handle routes in the Flask app using the Python code. So whenever I create a Flask app, I have to define my own routes, which are basically going to be used as the URLs in the web app. And so every single Flask app has to handle the default route, which is just the /. And so to handle that, I'm going to say app.route, and then it's just going to be the /. And this, in most websites, is just the home page. And the standard convention of saying this is def index, and then you return. You can say whatever string you want, but in this case, I'll say this is my first Flask app. For each route that you define, you have to have a function below it that handles that route. So this index function, this is going to handle the route for the /, which is basically the home page. And so if I run that, I'm going to control S, and then it's going to give me this error, but that's okay. You just click on this button over here, and then I'm going to go back to the program and then reload that. And so now you can see that it shows the content that I want, which was this is my first Flask app. You can see that's over here. So now that I handled that route, I'm gonna start handling the other routes, and I'm also gonna show you later how to basically render in HTML files so that we can do more complicated things. Okay, so you just created your first Flask app, and if all you need to know were the bare bones, then you can just get off the video. But I highly encourage you to watch all the way to end because there's so much more that you can do with this library. Alright, so I got the Flask app to work, but it's the most basic app, and it only shows a string of text on the homepage. And I want to do way more than that because this is pretty boring just for a web application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say render template and then I'm gonna pass in index.html. And basically what this does is basically there's gonna be another folder in the same directory as this Python file, and it's gonna be called templates. And then inside that folder, I'm gonna create a new file called index.html, and it's gonna render whatever content's inside there. And Flask is really cool because it lets you do this inside each of the routes that you're defining. And basically what this means is that for each route that you define, it basically handles all the front end work that you put inside the HTML file, as long as you render it inside the function. And so to make this actually work, I'm gonna do import render template here. And you're gonna see throughout the video, I'm gonna start importing a lot more libraries later. And throughout the video, you'll learn all the different libraries that are needed to create this login system. And so we're still not done yet. I'm gonna go over here and then create a new folder and call it templates. And inside that templates folder, I'm gonna say index.html. And then I'm gonna use a VS Code shortcut. I'm gonna say exclamation mark and then tab. This basically creates the complete boilerplate of an HTML file. And so inside the head tag, the title is just going to be called home instead of document. And inside the body, I'm going to create a p tag, which is a paragraph. And I'm going to say, welcome to the website. If you have an account, or if you want to create an account, then click here. And then I'm gonna make this word, I'm gonna make it go to another page. And so this here is going to be this here word. I'm going to wrap it around a tag, which is going to take me to another URL. And then inside the link, I'm going to say URL 4, or I have to actually pass it inside double curly braces. And then I say URL 4, and inside URL 4, I'm going to pass in the name of the function that I'm going to create later. So I haven't actually created this function yet. You'll see how this is going to work later. But for now, I'm going to say I'm going to pass in the register function inside the URL 4. And I'm also going to put double quotes instead of single quotes, just so that I don't get an error. And then this basically is going to, if the user clicks on here, it's going to take the user to the URL that handles the register route. And so I haven't created this route yet, but you'll see how that's going to work out later. And I also have to import this URL 4 because it's provided by Flask and I didn't import it yet, so I'm going to go over here and then say URL 4. If I save that, again, every time I save it, it's going to give me this error, but I just click on this button over here and then go back to the website, reload that, and then it says that it could not build the URL for register. That's completely okay. I'm just going to go back and change it to index because I haven't actually defined the function yet, but once I do create the register function, I'm going to change this back to register instead of index because it's not supposed to be index right now. But if I save that and then reload, then it's going to take a while because I got an error here. So I'm going to click on this button and then reload again. And so now it says, welcome to the website. If you want to create an account, then click here. And so this is supposed to take you to the register page, but we don't have that, so it's just taking us back to the same page. But you can see how this is gonna work out though, because all this text was defined by a separate HTML file over here. And so it's really cool that Flask lets you basically create external HTML files and render that inside a Python file. Now that I set up my index route, I'm gonna create 2 more routes, the register route and a login route. Because a login system typically has 2 parts, a registration where the user can create an account, and there's also a login part where the users who already created an account can sign in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create an HTML file for each one. Now I'm gonna create 2 more HTML files. I'm gonna go to this templates folder and I'm gonna say register.html and then login.html. Then I'm gonna go back to the Python file and then I'm gonna handle the other routes. So I'll say @app.route and then /register, and I'll copy that and say /login, and then I'm gonna create another function for each of the routes. So I'll say register for the register route. I'm gonna return render template register.html. Then for the login one, I'm gonna say login return render template login.html. And so basically for the /register URL and the /login URL, it's basically going to render the respective HTML files. So I'm gonna go to register and do exclamation mark. Do that same for the login HTML. And the title for register.html file, I'm gonna say the title is called register, and the title for the login is just called login. And then for the body, I'm gonna create an h1 tag, and then I'm gonna say create an account. And I'm also gonna create an h4 account right now. I'm gonna say h4, and I'm gonna ask a question. I'm gonna say, do you have an account? If so, click here. And then I'm gonna wrap that around the a tag, because I want this here word, I want the user to go to the login page if they click on this word. So I'm gonna create a link for that. I'm gonna say URL4 is equal to, or not equal to, in parentheses. And I also forgot to use double curly braces, and I say URL4 and then login. And so if the user clicks on the here, it's going to check the Python file and see which one refers to the login function, which is over here. And I'm gonna do the same I'll copy this and paste it in the login page, but instead of creating an account, it's going to be sign in, and then the h4 tag is going to be, I'll say don't have an account, and then click here. And then the login, instead of the login route, it's going to be the register. And also remember to change this from the beginning. I'm going to say, instead of index, I'm going to say register, because the only reason why I did index before was because I didn't create this yet, but now I did. And I'm going to save that. And going to run it. If I go to /login, it shows me this page. And then if I do /register, it shows me this page. And if I click on here, it's going to take me to the sign in. If I click on here, the don't have an account, click here, it's going to take me to create an account, which is the register page. And also now, if I test the text in the home page, I'm going to say, if I click on this one, That's going to take me to the register page now. Alright, so there's still a lot more I have to do with the register and the login pages, but I got a pretty good start on them. And I'm actually going to start switching gears and work on implementing a database in the program. And this database is going to store information like the user ID, the username, and the password. Okay, so now I'm going to start building out the database, and to do this, I'm going to be importing a lot of libraries. And so to do this, I'm going to say from Flask SQLAlchemy, then from Flask SQLAlchemy, and I'm going to be looking at my other screen over here because there's a lot of libraries to import. So I'm going to say from Flask SQLAlchemy, import SQLAlchemy. Below the app instance, or below where I create the app, I'm going to say app.config, and then I'm going to say SQLAlchemy, and the database URI is equal to SQLite //database.db. This basically tells SQLAlchemy that the Flask application should look at the SQLite database called database.db. So after I do that, I'm going to say app.config, and then we pass in a secret key. I'm going to say it's password. It doesn't need to be secure because this project is just for educational purposes. And then after I configure the app, I'm going to say db is equal to SQLAlchemy. I'm going to create the instance and then pass in the Flask app. Okay, now that I finished initializing the SQLAlchemy inside the Flask app, I'm gonna now build out the data model. So to do that, in Flask, how that works is you gotta build out classes for each table. And so I'm gonna call this class or this table in the database users. And then inside it, I'm gonna pass in user mixin, and then which is basically it's a class from SQLAlchemy or Flask SQLAlchemy. So I'll say user mixin, and then I'm also gonna say db.model. And so these basically give me useful properties for creating the table, which are gonna be used for the login and the registration system. And so what I'm gonna say inside the class is I'm gonna say the user ID is equal to the column, so it's db.column, and then I'm just gonna pass in the column name, which is going to be called user ID, and then the second argument is going to be the type of data it is. And so the user ID is going to be an integer, and then we also say primary key is equal to true. And I'm just gonna copy and paste that, and I'm gonna change this to username, change this to password, and then change this to username, change this to password. And then here I'm going to pass in a string of 50 characters, and this means that the max number of characters the field can be is 50. Can't be anything more than that. And I'm also gonna say unique is equal to true. And I'm not gonna say primary key for the username and password because those aren't primary keys. And what a primary key actually is it identifies, it's a unique identifier for each user. So in this table, no two users are going to have the same user ID because it's unique to every single person. It basically identifies who is logged into the system based on this unique ID. That's what a primary key is. And the SQLite is basically going to automatically generate numbers because db.integer, and it's a primary key. It's automatically going to generate numbers. So we don't need to worry about getting any input for user ID because that's automatically taken care of. And I'm also going to say def get ID self return user ID or self.user ID. And you're gonna see how I'm gonna use this function later. It's gonna be used later in the video for when I create the login system. So make sure to stick around for that part. And I just realized that we don't actually need to have unique equals true for this password field, because there's no need to make sure that every single password is unique. But we do need to keep the unique equals true for the username field, because we want to make sure that no two users have the same usernames. And so now that I created, or I set up what the users table, what that structure is going to look like, I'm going to now actually create the table inside the database. And so to do that, I'm gonna create another function called def table exists, and it's not going to take in any arguments. And then I'll also going to go up here and say from SQLAlchemy import inspect, and this basically gives me useful properties that's going to help me determine whether or not there are tables inside the database. And so I'm gonna say engine is equal to db.engine. This basically lets me interact with the data. And then I'll say inspector is equal to inspect. Then you pass in the engine. And then this inspector now has properties from this inspect method. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say tables is equal to inspector dot get table names. And it's going to take in parentheses. And so this basically returns all the table names inside the database. Or in this case, it's only going to be one table name, because our database only contains one table, which is the users class, or the users table. And so I'm going to return if the length of tables is greater than 0. And so this function basically returns a boolean. And now I'm going to say with app.app underscore context. And so I'm going to say if not table exists, which means that if there are no tables existing in the database, then only then we're going to add the table into the database.db file. So I'll say create all. And you have to have this inside this app.app context. If you don't, then you're actually going to run into an error. And I just realized that this user mixin, this is actually not from Flask SQLAlchemy. I have to say from Flask login, which is another extension from the Flask library. I'm gonna say import user mixin, and if I run that, if I run it again, it's gonna take a while to load. Then it should work. And if you saw what happened over here on my Explorer tab, you can see that it automatically created a new folder called instance, and inside that instance it says database.db, and that's because we named it that way over here. And so if I click on that, it shows the table with the fields, the user ID, the username, and the password, but it's empty. And I'm going to show you how to fill this up later. Now I'm going to create a sign up and a login form where the user can type in the information and then submit it to the server. Before I actually start creating the forms, I'm going to go to the register and the login route. And inside the parentheses, I'm going to say methods is equal to get and post. And I'm going to say the same for the login forms or the login route. And I'm doing this because if I don't include this post request, then the forms isn't going to work properly, because a forms in Flask, it basically, when the user submits the forms on the Flask app, it's going to send a post request to the server, which is basically where it sends data to the server, and then the get request is where it retrieves the data, and then it processes it and displays it on the page. That's what it is in very simple terms. And so if I didn't include this, then the default is just the get request. And so that means that if I didn't have it, it'd only just take care of displaying the front end stuff. So I need to include the post request. I need to make sure that the register route and the login route, that they both handle the post request because there are forms involved in them. Okay, now I'm ready to create the forms, and I'm over here on the register.html file. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say form, and I'm creating this form between the h1 tag and the h4 tag because I want the form to be in between them. So I'm gonna create a form, and then I'm going to say that the form is going to send a post request, and I'll just give it an ID of register form, and then I'm gonna have 3 inputs, or not 3, only 2 inputs: the username and the password. And this is how you allow the user to enter in information. You create the input tag, and then you say type is equal to text, name is equal to username, and then the placeholder is going to be equal to username. And then I'm gonna do the same for the password, but the only difference is that instead of a type of text, it's gonna be type of the password, PSW, or password, like that. And then there we go. And so basically what this does is it creates 2 inputs. The type of the first input is just going to be a string. The type of the second input, that's going to be a password, meaning that when the user types it, it's going to show those little black dots that you always see whenever you're typing in your password in any login system, because it wouldn't be as secure if your password wasn't covered up. And these names, basically represent, or they're going to be used in the Python app later, and I'll show you how that's going to be used near the end of the video. And the placeholder, these are going to be used for when the user doesn't enter in any information. This is going to be the default value of what's going to show on the screen. And I'm also going to create a button that says, it's going to be, I'm going to say register, and then it's going to be of type equals submit. This is the button that's going to be in charge of submitting the form and sending that post request. So I'm going to say that, and then I'll do the same for the login form. So go over here, and then I'll change this to login, and then I'll change this to login. And then I'm also going to actually change this to a different name because I don't want it to get mixed up in the Python file when I call them later. So I'm going to say login username, login password, and this one I'll say register username, register password. So I'll save that, and then if I run it, then I'm going to click on the link, and I'm going to click here, and you can see that it shows the login form, and if I type something in the password, you can see it's the black dots because I said that it was a type. I said in the code that it's the type is equal to password. So that's why it's showing the black dots. But the only thing that's kind of bugging me is that it's all horizontal. I want it to be vertical on top of each other instead of side to side. So how I'm going to do that is pretty simple. I'm just going to say BR, and I'm going to say two of these. It's going to create a line break, or actually 2 line breaks in this case. And it's going to make sure that they're vertical instead of horizontal. And so I'll say the same for the login page. And now if I reload that, now it's looking better because it's vertical, and same for the login page. Now that I'm done creating the login and the register forms, I'm going to start hashing the passwords. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. This is going to require me to import another extension called bcrypt. So I'm going to say from Flask bcrypt import bcrypt. And this is in charge of, or this is going to give me a bunch of useful properties for hashing the passwords and checking if the passwords are hashed. And so you'll see what I mean by that later. So I'll go to the register function, and now I'm going to say if the method, or if the request.method is equal to get, then only then we register the, or we display the everything inside the register.html file. If not, elif request.method is equal to post, then we're going to handle everything, all the information that the user inputted in the forms. But I just realized that I forgot to import the request, the class, so I'll say that, and then that should work now. And I'm going to say to access the form that the user, or let me rephrase that again. To access the register form that the user inputted in, we're going to say register password, or first I'll actually say register username is equal to request.form, and then inside square brackets you pass in the name over here. So whatever name you put inside the input, inside the form, that's where you're going to put inside the square brackets in the Python file. And so I'm going to say the same for the password. I'm going to say register password, register password. And so this is going to get the password that the user types in inside the register form. And so now I have to hash the password. And bcrypt gives me a nice method to do this. I'm going to say hash password is equal to bcrypt dot, and then generate password hash, and then you pass in the register password. And I'm hashing the password because it's a pretty common practice among a lot of organizations, because it makes the database more secure. Imagine if you just put in the password inside a database. That means all the users or all the employers who have access to the database, they can see all the user information and the passwords for the customers. And that wouldn't be secure. So we need to hash the passwords so that people who have access to a database don't have access to the actual passwords themselves. So after I do that, I'm gonna say username exists, and I'm gonna look at my other screen here because there's a lot to type out. So I'm gonna say user.query.filter, and then user.username, and then instead of user it's users, and it's gonna be users.username is equal to register username dot first. And so this is basically going to tell me if the username if the person already registered their username, then it's going to be in the database. And if it does exist in the database, if it's equal to the registered username, then the username exists is going to return that. It's going to return that name. And so basically what this does, it basically filters the database based on this condition, whether or not the username that they inputted, whether or not it exists in the database. And so after I do that, I'm going to say if not usernames exists. So if the username that they inputted, if it doesn't exist already in the database, then only then we're going to add that username into the database, because we don't want to add the same username into the database twice, because that would be redundant and unnecessary. So I'm going to say if the username doesn't exist, then we're going to create a user object by saying users, and then we use these fields. And so we don't need to pass anything for the user ID, because like I said before, that's automatic. So I'm going to say username is equal to the registered username, and then the password is equal to the hash password. And remember to use the hash password. Don't use the registered password, or else it won't be the hash password that's going into the database. And this basically is going to add a user, it's going to add a new row into the users table in the database. And that row is going to contain the user ID, the username that the user inputted, and the password, the hash password that the user inputted. And so to actually add that row into the database, we're going to say db dot and session dot add user row. Then I'll say db dot session dot commit. And then in the end, after the user hits submit, or they hit the register button on the forms, we're going to take it back to, let's say redirect URL 4, and we're going to take them to the login page. And I need to import this redirect, which basically redirects the user to another URL. Say it over here. And now we're good to go with the register route. And now I'm going to test out the register form. And I just realized that this bcrypt should be a capital B. And I also forgot to create an instance of this bcrypt class. So I'm going to do that over here. I'm going to say bcrypt is equal to bcrypt, and then you pass in the app name. And then if I save that and then run it and click on the link, I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to, for the username, I'm going to say Dylan. For the password, I'm going to just say 123. Click register. And it takes me to the login page like I wanted it to do. And the cool thing is, if I go back to the page and then go to database.db, if I reload this, you can see that now it gives me the user ID, which is automatically generated. It says 1, and then it says the username, which I typed in, is Dylan. And you can see the cool thing is that it automatically converts my password, which was 123, into a bunch of random numbers and special characters. And this is going to be useful because it makes this whole login and registration system more secure. Now that I have a functioning register page that sends the username and password to the database, I'm going to create a login page that basically checks if the username and password are correct. In the login function, I'm going to do something similar to what I did in the register route. So I'm going to say if method or if request.method is equal to get, then we're just going to render the login.html file. But if it's equal to post, then I'm going to handle the information that the user inputs inside the login form. And I'll figure that out later, because before I do that, I actually have to import a few more things with the Flask login extension. So I'm going to say it's also going to import login manager, and then it's also going to import login user, logout user, and login required. And below this bcrypt, I'm just going to say login manager is equal to the login manager instance. And this is going to make creating the login system a lot more easier. And so I'm going to go before this login function. And this is something that you're going to have, it's required to do with the login manager. And if you don't do it, then you're going to run into an error. So that's why I'm doing it right now. I'm going to say app, or not app, I'm going to say login manager dot user loader. And then I'm going to say def load user, and it's going to pass, it's going to take in the user ID, and then it's going to return the user, it's going to return the user ID from the users table. And so this function is going to, it basically gets the current user ID. Whoever is on the Flask application, it's going to retrieve that user ID information. And this is something we got to do whenever we're working with login manager. And then after I do that, I'm going to access the username and the password from the login form. And to do that, I'm going to say login username is equal to, and I'll actually just copy and paste this because it saves a lot more time. I'll say login, and then login password. This is login username. This is login password. And it's a little bit different because now we're checking if the hashed password exists in the database. And if it does exist, then we're going to log the user in. But if it's not, then we're not going to let the user in because either they didn't enter the right username or the password. And so to do this, I'm going to say correct user is equal to, and I'm going to basically paste in this because it's pretty much the same, except instead of register username, it's going to be login username. And so this is going to it's going to tell us whether or not the username that the user inputted inside the login form, whether or not that's inside a database. If it is, that's good because that means that the username, that means that they typed in their username right. Now I gotta check if the password is right. So to do that, I'm going to say if, and then correct user is not none. Meaning that if the user typed in the correct username, and we're going to use the bcrypt.check password hash, and then I'm going to say the correct user dot password, because we can access the field this way. And so if that password is equal to, or if the unhashed password of that username, of the person with that username, has the, or sorry, I got that backwards. If the hashed password of that username corresponds with the login password, which is unhashed, if that's correct, If that's true, then that means the password is right. So basically what this method is doing is basically comparing the hash password over here and the unhashed password. And they have to correspond with each other. And so if that's true, then we're going to basically log in the user, and then you put in their username. And so this login user function or the method, it basically it's going to store the user ID of this correct user. That's going to be stored inside the current Flask session, and it's going to stay there until the session's done or until the user logs out. And I'm going to be handling logouts in a second later, but one more thing we have to do with the login. I'm going to say else return, and then I'm going to say redirect, or not redirect, sorry, it's going to be render template index.html. So if the user gets either the username wrong or the password wrong, it's going to take them back to the home page. But if the user gets both the username and the password right, then we're going to return render template and then dashboard.html. And I'm going to be working on this right now. Okay, now I'm going to create a page that the user has access to only if they're logged in. And here's what the code is going to look like. I'm going to create another HTML file called, if I go into a templates folder, I'm going to call it dashboard.html. And then I'm going to do the VS Code shortcut and then change the title to dashboard. And then inside the body, I'm going to say, in the h1 tag, I'm going to say welcome. And then I'm going to say inside the curly braces, I'm going to say current user dot username. And I'm going to use something called Jinja, which is something from Flask. It lets you use Python syntax in Java or in HTML. So to do that, you do the curly brace, and then in between you do parentheses. And then here you can do if statements. So I'm gonna say if the current user is authenticated, if they're authenticated, then I think I spelled that wrong. Authenticated. There we go. And then I'm also gonna say, I'm gonna paste that and then say end if, or I just accidentally added those tabs. Sorry about that. I'll say end if. And this is going to, basically, this is only going to show if the current user is logged in. So if the current user is logged in, then we're going to show the username. And the current user, this is something provided from Flask. It basically gets the user ID, and based on your user ID, it's going to show you the username. I'm also going to create a button, a logout button that basically, I'm going to say create the button tag, and then I'll call it logout. And when the user clicks on this, it's going to clear out the user ID from the current Flask session. And so I'm going to say onClick is equal to window.location.href is equal to, and then inside double curly braces, I'm going to say URL for logout. So basically, once the user clicks on the logout button, it's going to change the current URL to the URL of the logout route. And I actually didn't handle this route yet, so that's what I'm going to do next. Alright, I'm going to create another route for the dashboard.html. So I'll say app.route/dashboard. And this is going to be a really, it's going to be a one-liner. So it's def dashboard return dash render template dashboard.html. And then now I have one last thing to do for this whole project. And so if you made it all the way here, then thank you guys so much for watching, because I know that this has been a really long video. But anyways, we're almost done. So I'm gonna say app.route, and then I'm gonna say the logout. And this is gonna handle the case where the user clicks on the logout button. And I'm gonna change this to equals window, not the other way around. I don't know why it was like that before. And I'm gonna say def logout return, or not return. I'm gonna say logout user, which is going to clear the user ID from the current Flask session. And I'm gonna say return redirect URL for index. And this is gonna take the user back to the home page. And I'm also gonna add a login required for both of these routes, because get rid of that. And I'm adding this because we need to make sure that the user only users that are logged in can have access to these two routes. And that should be it for the project. I'm gonna save everything, and then I'm going to reload. Okay, so I'm gonna click here, and this takes you to the sign up page. But I already have an account with the username of Dylan, so I'm gonna say click here. It's gonna take me to the sign in page. And so, and remember that the form of the sign in, that was handled over here. So it's gonna take in my username and my password. So I'm gonna Dylan, and then my password was 123. I'm gonna click login, and then it's gonna say welcome Dylan, because if I go back to the code, this is where it handles displaying my username. So then after that, there's a logout button, and the logout button was over here. That's going to take me to the logout route, which is over here. So I'm gonna say logout, and that's going to take me back here. If I go back in and I try doing /dashboard, then it's not going to work, because we need to have an account to access the dashboard page. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this whole project. Okay, if you made it all the way here to this video, then you've learned how to build a login system that you can apply to any Flask project. And if you're here, then I know that you're passionate about learning Python or coding in general. So I'm gonna put out a video somewhere on the screen. So I encourage you guys to check it out, and I hope to see you guys there.